thing that the vital signs helps any community and the city do is tell the good stories. There's plenty of stories about the city of Baltimore that are not so good, and those are the ones that make the headline news. Well, these are the good stories. The stories that show that the indicators went in the right direction. So I'm going to start with those, and then I'll walk you through some other directions that the indicators went in. The crime rate is down everywhere. And this is the same methodology, using the same sources of data, and in fact the data gets better as we go along because of GPS ability to actually track down where incidents occur. So the data is getting better, the methodology stays the same, so when you look at trends over time, you are essentially comparing apples to apples. So the crime rate is down in every neighborhood across the decade, so, particularly in places where we have a lot of tourists. Downtown, Midtown, which we are now sitting in, which those of you that were here hopefully attest to the feeling that you have now that it's hopefully a safer place. And then Fells Point is another high tourist area. These are the areas that we saw the most reduction in crime. The teenage birth rate is down. It's down nationally, it's down for the state of Maryland, it's down for the city of Baltimore, it's down in every neighborhood. And there are, again, good news stories for neighborhoods that don't tend to get a lot of good news, like Seton Hill, Cherry Hill, and Brooklyn Curtis Bay. These are areas that had high rates to begin with, and they came down pretty dramatically. Children with elevated blood levels. This was a huge public health issue in the late 1990s. I don't know if anybody in here was working on that issue, but they found that if the child has high lead, obviously that leads to poor educational outcomes, but the source of that lead was in the home itself. And so mitigating lead poisoning in the home was really a big push here in the city of Baltimore, where most of our stock of housing is pretty old. The data shows that it went from 12.1% of children that were tested with high levels down to 1.6. Huge success story in making sure that the interventions happened where they needed to actually happen and the houses got mitigated. And now there's only 9 neighborhoods where children continue to be diagnosed with high elevated blood levels, but that just makes intervention strategies a little bit more targeted. All right, diversity and income. Again, major-ish improvements, I should say. The first slide was really major improvements. These are what you might consider a little bit major improvements. The median income, these are in real dollars, not adjusted dollars, but the median income has gone up, and it's gone up in precisely the areas where we've seen growth in some of our neighborhoods, like Inner Harbor, Federal Hills, South Baltimore, Mount Washington, Cold Spring. The percent of children living in Baltimore declined a little bit. There are some neighborhoods that did better than others, but it went from 26% to 24.6%. So at least it's going in the right direction. The diversity index. This is an index that basically is the odds that you pick 2 people in the same neighborhood and they're of a different race or ethnicity, which is of course the point of the group that we're meeting here today. The odds in Baltimore in 2000 was only 38% that you pick 2 people at random and they'd be of a different race or ethnicity. Today it is 54.5%, so clearly went in the right direction. And we did a little bit of analysis for the neighborhoods that grew between 2000 and 2010, and the difference is even more stark. The neighborhoods that grew, the diversity index is almost 60%, and for the ones that did not grow, the diversity index is roughly 30%. So clearly, when we have people moving into the city, race may be a different issue than for people that have been here for a long time, something that we need to think about potentially as a group. Education. The percent of high school students dropping out has decreased. Again, a good success story. Decreased pretty dramatically from 10% in 2005, that's when we started receiving this data from the public school system, to 3.9% in 2010. And again, you can see the neighborhoods that can claim kind of more success in certain areas. Again, neighborhoods that don't get a lot of good press, like Poppleton and Southwest Baltimore. And in terms of chronic absenteeism, there's been, again, a big push in the city to try and get kids to stay in school and arrive in school, and lots of people are working in truancy. The chronic absenteeism for middle school in particular, and we probably have this conversation later, really dramatically declined according to the data. Again, this is school system data. It went from 30% chronic absenteeism, the middle school range is 6th to 8th grade, down to 16%. Now, elementary school stays the same. Elementary school is about 12%, pretty steady. probably different issues at the elementary school level than the middle school level. And then high school, unfortunately, is about the same at 40%. 40% chronic absenteeism throughout the decade for high school. So we have work to do in the later years and the earlier years. And then youth engagement, again, something that probably will come up in conversations, how it obviously portends to future engagement as adults. That did go up a little bit from 81.7% to 86%. And again, pretty good area increases in the Waverlys and the downtown Seton Hill area. So these are some maps that we started to create for the YPR, Lines Between Us. And what's tremendous to me is that we're breaking our own line, which is the city-county lines. So you can see the data across various places in the region, which I think is fantastic. It's a fantastic thing for us to be able to do. This is median household income. When you're reading the map, the light yellows are our lowest median income areas, and the darker browns, as you gradiate out, is the highest median incomes. And so in the city, you can see a little bit of a pattern. I think it was Governor Schaefer or Governor Ornelli, when he was mayor, that used to call it the kidneys of the city that are throbbing. And you can see in the middle of the city, the lowest median incomes has a similar pattern for poverty as well. So this is in 2000, and this is what it is in 2010. Not too much dramatic difference, when you bring both of them back, the places that have pretty good median incomes are still the places that have pretty good median incomes. There is a little bit, again, of the reduction of poverty in some neighborhoods, which show up here. But again, the center is still the places where we have the lowest incomes. But you can see the dramatic increase in median income in the South Baltimore Peninsula around the harbor in general. You see a lot of high incomes there that weren't there before, largely because there wasn't housing there before. This is the poverty. So obviously that was the income, this is the poverty. In this case, the darker the color, the more poverty rate. The lighter the color, the less poverty rate. And when you start looking at the areas, outside the city, I think it's interesting. The Towson area is probably Towson students. The Catonsville area is probably UMBC students. But you can see some of the other areas where there is poverty, not just in the city, but elsewhere in the region. And I think that is going to be pretty interesting when we have these conversations about who left the city, who stayed in the city, who's moving in. And this is the Racial Diversity Index, again, breaking the city-county line, which I think is really amazing. The lighter the color means not much chance of finding two people of two different races or ethnicities. So the lighter the color means less diversity, the darker the color, the more the diversity. And for those of you that either are not that familiar with Baltimore or are very familiar with Baltimore, the southeast part of town, just on the county line, is where we have a lot of a Hispanic population growth, pretty dramatic Hispanic population growth in that part of town. But the Brooklyn-Curtis Bay area is interesting because it is a very black and white neighborhood now, which it wasn't before, and as well as the Northeast. So most of the parts that grew, I would say, kind of follow a north-south line, and I think we have a map of that. When you think about the racial diversity pattern versus where we have growing neighborhoods, they are correlated. All right, so ups and downs. The housing market is the pretty biggest up and down that most of our neighborhoods felt pretty viscerally. Huge swings in equity for most households in the city of Baltimore. That just means that we had a high of median price in 2006. We had a high in rehabs, because most of the housing in the city of Baltimore has already been built. So what it is all about is about rehabilitation of existing housing. And so once the equity grew by 2006, we see a lot of people trying to invest. Unfortunately, that investment hits precisely when the national market crashes in 2007, and then we see the high in foreclosures in 2009. And the city obviously experienced that kind of a swing, and specific neighborhoods in particular, like Patterson Park, felt this kind of a swing pretty dramatically, and Reservoir Hill, if anybody has been there. Median sales price went up in general in the city, which actually bucks the trend of some of the counties that had started at a higher point. So we have kind of reached some level of equality with the surrounding counties, but again, the biggest dramatic increases are in the downtown, which didn't really have much of a residential population to begin with, and Patterson Park in South Baltimore, which is Locust Point. Residential rehabs, of course, again, were up in general over the course of the year, which means that people are continuing to invest in their neighborhoods. And then in terms of educational proficiency, the rates have gone up and down for those that are tracking these. The huge gains when Alonzo first came into his position in 2007, I believe, and then the last year they said have had some mixed results, and the data shows that as well. All right, so looking ahead, this is the pattern of neighborhoods that grew, and the dark green here means neighborhoods that grew dramatically. The blue is the most dramatic increases, which is Harbor East and downtown. The orange is stable to declining, and then the red is where we had the most dramatic declines, which is right around the hospital area, the UBDI, and north of East Baltimore Development, which you can see even if you drive past it. There was obviously a lot of reconstruction going on there. The goldenrod is interesting. The west part of town, which, again, if you've driven by there, this is not the area with the dramatic vacant house notices. This is beyond, Sandtown, Winchester, but people are not moving in. So the housing stock looks relatively okay.